Eu trabalho aqui na Uninter, nos Estados Unidos. Eu estou em Boston, fazem 20 anos que eu moro aqui nos Estados Unidos. Esses últimos dias têm sido muito interessantes com a eleição, vocês devem estar acompanhando por aí. Queria falar que a palestra hoje o webinar vai ser sobre Digital Transformation, transformação digital. A palestra vai ser em inglês, com pessoas do mercado. Vamos ter 3 convidados, o Scott Sargent, da IC, o Felipe Morais, da Partners, e Rod Feldman, da College Interactive. Vocês podem acompanhar pelo YouTube, onde vai ter tradução, subtitles em português, que vocês podem acompanhar e não vai ter nenhum problema. Bom, como vocês devem estar acompanhando, Digital Transformation não é uma coisa nova. A gente está vivendo isso há vários anos. Imagino que alguns de vocês assistiram outras palestras que a Uninter organizou durante essa semana, mas no último ano nós tivemos uma aceleração enorme por causa do Covid. E um exemplo que foi interessante quando eu assisti as palestras que aconteceram essa semana foi que quando você pensa em transformação digital, você pensa em tecnologia, mas existe um papel fundamental aí, que é o papel humano, né, das pessoas que estão envolvidas com isso. Então, eu tenho um exemplo super interessante para dar antes da gente começar em inglês, que a gente estava fazendo há um tempo atrás, em 2002, o website da nossa empresa, e a gente tinha que fazer o Facebook também. E aí a gente contratou uma menina de 17 anos, todos os sócios eram mais velhos, e ela falou: pessoal, eu criei o Facebook e vocês têm que vocês têm que like it, vocês têm que gostar. E aí todo mundo falou assim: não, we like it. E eu falei: nossa, existe um gap aqui de comunicação enorme, existe tecnologia vindo, mas esse pessoal não entende o que significa like no Facebook, né? Isso gerou assim, foi no momento que eu entendi que se a gente tivesse tecnologia, mas as pessoas não estivessem preparadas, a gente teria problema aí para implementar tecnologia dentro de empresa. Eu queria agora começar a chamar o pessoal. Queria começar com o Scott Sargent. Scott Sargent trabalha na IC. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Enio. Hello, everyone.
Scott, would be great if you can introduce yourself, tell a little bit your job at IC, and also talk a little bit what IC is doing in the process of helping international companies to enter the U.S. market.
Sure. Be happy to, Enio. So a little bit about my background. So I've got a varied background, have been in a variety of different industries, everything from energy to logistics, to technology, to distribution. I've spent time in healthcare and in a variety of functions. So I've got an engineering background and degree. I got a law degree, was practiced law for a while, and I was CFO for a while. Now I'm dealing a lot with customers, clients all over the world in a variety of shapes and forms and sizes that are helping them determine what their digital strategy is, what their transformational strategy is, especially in this pandemic environment that we're in. As Enio indicated, I'm a partner at IEC Partners, have been there since about 2013. And what I deal a lot with is helping clients understand the possibilities associated with digital transformation, not just from the standpoint of what are the tools and techniques that are used to activate that. Those are always important, and that's tend to be the fun stuff. The hard part is, how do you get the organization to adopt that mentality, and how do you pull people along and include them so that they operate in a different way that's maybe not natural for them, and help support transformation in speed and effectiveness. So it's a lot of traditional or standard change management principles. So a clear vision, lots of training, tons of communication, lots of meetings. And by the way, the tools have to work too. So that's sort of kind of an afterthought, table stakes. But it's incredibly exciting, and we're seeing all kinds of areas in industry around the world that are taking off because of digital transformation.
Scott, because you have a great experience with corporations and also with startups, I think it would be very interesting for us if you can cover topics related to digital transformation related to these two main clients that you deal with?
Yeah. So right. So, and they're two very different environments, because in many cases, the corporations are the recipient or the beneficiary of the startup, who has the tendency to be the digital transformer. So they are the ones that are developing the technology, the tools that can transform industries, small, medium enterprise clients, things like that. One of the things that it's really interesting that we're detecting is that there's lots of technologies that are being generated, being developed, being offered in the market that are tools. And so what's happening from the entrepreneurs, from the startups perspective, they're saying, well, these tools that we're developing are truly best in class, or they're very disruptive. And here's what you should be doing, Mr. or Mrs. Client or big corporation, to be able to transform your business because of that. What they don't understand is that asking the corporation to understand another tool while they are already overwhelmed by tools that they have already, and it's not natural for them to just learn a new tool for the sake of learning new tools. It's overwhelming and it becomes ineffective. As I draw an example, it is like giving somebody an Excel spreadsheet. Their expectation is that they're going to use it to add up numbers in a column. But can you imagine the power of Excel that exists? And why, if you're the creator of Excel, why isn't corporations using more of that? Because it takes so much energy and effort and work to understand how much power there is behind the Excel. So my point to the startups is make your tool as simple as possible, and also make it more of a solution than having the customer have to learn so much. Give them a solution-oriented approach rather than a tool approach. And then the flip side, on the customer side, and the client side, what I say is, I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on. The last thing you want is to have a new technology, a new technique, a new idea into the mix. But these are going to own your business if you're not careful. You're going to get surpassed. You're going to get disrupted by these guys. So be open-minded and look for collaboration. Help them help you, so that you're not doing it all yourself. Be innovative in your thinking. Be a growth hacker is one of the terms that we use. So with all that, we ask our clients to think differently, the large clients, than they did previously, and to be more receptive and open-minded to the startups.
Thanks, Scott. You're going to rejoin us pretty soon. I would like to invite Rob Feldman from College Interact. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Hey, Enio, how are you?
Very good. Rob is CEO and founder of College Interactive. Rob, I think it would be very interesting if you can share a little bit your experience in education. I think that's an industry that has been changing for the last decades in terms of using new technologies for help students to learn. I think Uninter is a great example in how they are using technology to help students to learn. And because you're dealing with universities, would be interesting to learn a little bit from you right now, and then we're going to have the other guests together. What in the last year was, because of COVID, the acceleration of this transformation was huge. So can you talk a little bit the disruption that COVID had in terms of digital transformation for this college here and the impact that it's having?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for kind of painting the path for me. I actually just jotted down a bunch of notes as to some of Scott's points.
Before you go there, Rob, can you just quickly a little bit of your background and
Sure.
What's College Interactive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent my entire career in the higher education, marketing services and communications industry, helping colleges and universities across the U.S. Access, engage, and convert potential candidates into enrolled students. And we started out doing that years ago with some legacy communication channels, primarily print and direct mail. As the internet came into the mix in the mid-90s, we made that transition into digital marketing channels, email, web services, and such. And essentially really wanted to evolve as a company right around 2010 with the proliferation of smartphones, mobile devices coming into the market, and a new kind of digital aged audience that colleges were trying to connect with. So what we set out to do is build a best-in-class solution to solve for what was a growing gap in terms of accessing and communicating with a college-ready audience. So that's sort of the history of the product. And we basically set out to build and bring that entire experience into a comprehensive kind of end-to-end solution through a mobile app, a native mobile app we call the CI mobile app. And it's been really interesting. Really, the last year coming up to COVID was really the beginning, I would say, maybe the last 2 or 3 years of some level of digital transformation in terms of accessing better data, leveraging better data, operationalizing it to personalize an experience. And then all of a sudden, as COVID hit, as everybody knows, all of the in-person interactions that have occurred with potential college candidates came to a halt. So things like college fairs, face-to-face interactions, information sessions like we're doing right now virtually, were done face-to-face at conference centers and hotels. Visits to either high schools or other organizations came to a halt. So really the sledgehammer, as I call it, came down over a lot of folks' heads in higher ed and have caused them to really take a hard look at what their new strategies are going to be. As far as what College Interactive is, it really is not a university. We are the connective tissue between prospective students and universities. So we bring that whole connective experience into this mobile app.
Yeah, a question just came. Thanks for answering that, Rob. Maybe it's a good time to bring Felipe Morais. So it would be interesting to hear from him in terms of the health industry. Thanks, Rob. We'll be back soon with you. Hi, Felipe.
Hi, Enio. How are you?
Good. Felipe is Brazilian, so he can compare a little bit the situation between Brazil and US in terms of digital transformation. I think Felipe is also very lucky that he has the corporate hat, but he's a very successful entrepreneur. So it's a good comparison that would be interesting for us. And Felipe has an amazing job at Partners. And Felipe is going to explain a little bit what he's doing and what Partner is. But it's a job that's we can talk about innovation, but Felipe can talk much more than we can, because that's the place where we have innovation. And because Boston Talks is a hub for health, and Felipe is part of this. So Felipe, great to have you here. Can you talk a little bit about your background and also the job that you do?
Sure, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm an MD from Brazil, a radiologist. When I was in the first year of my medical residency, I noticed that the radiologists were concentrated in the large cities. The piece of equipment were going to the countryside of Brazil. I'm talking about 2006, 7. And back that time, this problem was being solved here in the US with a thing called teleradiology that was putting the radiologists to read the studies from reading centers or from home. Back that time, it was disruptive to say that a doctor could work from home. It's funny nowadays when we see that 12 years ago, we were talking about it. So we started we hired our professors, started selling their reports, and in 2015, we were serving 150 customers. We were the first teleradiology company in Brazil, ProLaudo, the company I founded. We were reading 20,000 reports per month and an operation with around 70 radiologists. It was one of the largest radiologist teams in Brazil, and we sold the company to a competitor in 2015. I decided to move here to the US to work with healthcare innovation, did my MBA at Babson College, and joined at Partners. That changed the name to Mass General Brigham. It's easier because probably people know about Mass General Hospital. Is the largest teaching hospital in the Harvard Medical School system. And Harvard Medical School, the two largest hospitals, Mass General Hospital and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, they are the two largest research hospitals in the world. So we received some billions of dollars from the federal government to do research, and that research sometimes generates an asset that can be marketed. And when I talk about an asset, it's a new drug that will reach the market, it's a new medical device, or it's a new digital health tool. And we have all of that in my portfolio. For instance, I manage the radiology and molecular imaging portfolio, and we are talking about really early stage technology. So I'm talking about technology that will reach the market 5, 10, 15 years from now. So as you mentioned, we are like a machine, a process of innovation. And I always like to work with something like that, we always think about innovation, about some like a crazy scientist in a lab, or a zeitgeist in the mind of a genius. It's not like that. I really wanted to understand innovation as a clear process and as a natural thing, as small increments that we make to a null concept. So I believe those are the largest things that we see nowadays. And it's really amazing what's been happening in healthcare, especially in the pandemic, post-COVID era, about the digital transformation and how that's impacting the hospitals and health systems around the world.
Yeah, the health industry is very unique, right? And that's amazing to be here with you, because it's a good learning for me and for everybody else that's at home watching us. But it's unique in a way that there is a lot of privacy that we need to have. There are a lot of concerns in this industry. And can you tell a little bit how digital transformation goes together with all these concerns in terms of privacy and everything else that we have to be very careful in terms of the patients?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I can tell about my personal experience. I'll talk about two things that happened in my last week with me. One thing was I was talking with an investigator, and in a moment in the conversation, he said something that just made his Alexa to turn on and say hi. And he figured out that we had a training that we couldn't have any like hearing devices in our working environment, because they are hearing what
privacy.
Yeah, it's key, right? We talk about, like, sometimes we talk about patient information. We in the corporation and the researchers, the basic researchers know, but the physicians cannot have hearing devices, and it's really important. We have our cell phones that are hearing, and we always should pay attention to. Another point that's also really interesting is that I was working last Friday, and then I received a message from the Chief Innovation Officer, the head of my division, saying that, look, you're not receiving any attachments to your email messages. And I'm talking about that later. That was a thing that was happening. Some hours after that, I received a message from a newsletter I'm a member of, and it was telling that the several U.S. healthcare systems were being attacked, and FBI was checking that, checking how that thing was happening, because hackers from around the world were attacking healthcare systems here. And if you imagine like the impact, we're seeing like some hoax. I don't know if they're hoaxes or of real news of some courts in Brazil that were being target of digital attack. And this is a thing that's a side effect. I used to talk that is a side effect of a drug. It's the side effect of digital transformation. Like it's not only about the good things. We need to learn how to deal with hackers. We need to learn how to deal with sensitive information, patients' information, especially in healthcare, as you mentioned. Imagine being able to access like a politician health record or a special person, like judging if that person can work in your company or not based on that background, healthcare background. So we have a lot of ethics running on. It's really interesting to see that rolling on.
Perfect. Felipe, Shirley asked a question. I will ask Onita to bring back Scott and Rob so we can address this question. Shirley, Scott will be the best one to answer that. I don't know if Scott saw that. But before, let me switch a little bit to Portuguese again. We were having some troubles with the YouTube. Pessoal, desculpa, o YouTube não está fazendo a tradução simultânea, nem está botando as legendas. Geralmente a gente consegue isso sem problemas, mas hoje não está funcionando. Acho que é sexta-feira à noite. As coisas não funcionam sempre muito bem. Peço desculpas, mas a gente vai seguir em inglês e espero que mais para frente a gente consiga ter os subtitles. Bom, queria trazer de volta então o Scott e o Rob. Scott, we had a question here from Shirley that she's asking if innovation is for large corporations or is for also small companies. What's your thought about this?
Well, so if it depends. Well, so the answer is for everybody, and I want to be thoughtful about when I say that, because innovation is typically, or sometimes the challenge is that people think that innovation means this tremendously massive disruptive idea. The truth is not that at all. Innovation occurs when you are trying to change, improve, make something more efficient, more effective. And it could be in very small ways. And there's lots of examples where innovation occurs, where there's tiny little steps that improve things, but the combination of all that, it gets added up and is a massive change in a business performance, fundamentals. Is the appetite for creating change, moving forward. Better.
It's cutting you a little bit, Scott. So I'll jump to Rob. Rob, in terms of the online education, Onita is very powerful in Brazil in terms of online education. Do you see that as the future for also colleges in US? I did my MBA at Babson. Felipe also did his MBA there. There is this powerful human interaction that we lose with only the online, right? So what's your view in terms of the issues that the schools are facing? Because in one side, you have to do more online. The other side, you lose the network and everything else. And how can you charge the students the amount that the universities in the US charge? We're talking about $60,000 a year if it's only online. So can you give us a little bit of the human side that we are going to be missing when we just do online classes?
Sure. Certainly a huge component of the traditional 4-year college experience is the on-campus social experience, face-to-face classroom experience, participating in class. So I believe that the hybrid approach will become much more prolific over time. The learning environment online is certainly a very good environment, and in terms of delivering information, having actually a classroom-like experience online is tremendous, especially at the graduate level or doctorate level. I do think in the undergraduate space, the traditional 4-year undergraduate degree, and I'm a Babson graduate, so I experienced my 4 years on campus. I think that still has a major place in higher education. But I will speak from personal experience. I mean, my own children who are now in their 20s all had some piece of their undergraduate experience online. So somewhat of a hybrid experience.
I made a comment here that you can have online class, but still have a good network. So it's up to you to try to get more of the network by yourself, right? Rob, what's your view on that?
I agree. I think, with the right tools, all of the new developing social platforms, et cetera, better learning platforms that universities are actually creating, allowing for breakout rooms, allowing for collaboration, allowing for peer-to-peer interaction. All of those things make a huge difference. And I think the other thing I wanted to just kind of popped into my head that I think is really interesting and really critical is the global impact of online education. So the ability for students in Brazil, France, Italy, and the United States to all be collaborating together. We're looking at a global economy. So I think that really allows students to come together internationally in a much more powerful way.
Great. And Felipe, in terms of the innovation, how far we go in the health industry in your view of this? It's changing so fast, but like we mentioned before, the organizations sometimes are not ready for this. So in your experience at partners, how you guys are dealing with this speed that we're going through in this last year?
Yeah, I connect that question with a question that Marilene Araújo did before. She was mentioned that the pandemic made people like to innovate more and advance some obstacles, and how that's happening here in the US. I tend to think that all organizations, like small ones, large ones, it was like a world war. Like the impact of this pandemic was a world war in like a few months. We needed to adapt to survive. And I think if you check about the supply chain, how people needed to like buy like what they wanted, to travel, like the basic things, to go to the hospital, like to have an appointment with your physician, everything changed. And we saw that the hospitals were hardly affected by the elective surgeries or elective procedures that were canceled during the pandemic. This harmed several hospitals across the world, not only the US, in Brazil as well. At the same time, we saw a lot of health insurances that had less expenses and could like save more money and be better prepared for the post-pandemic phase. So when we see the healthcare industry, it's an industry where the players are not so well connected. We have the payer, you have the patient, you have the provider, and there are several points of view. So I think every single stakeholder in the process had to change. It was not easy, but we learned a lot, and I think we developed a lot. At least in our organization at Mass General Brigham, we saw a lot of teleconsults happening. Like we see doctors. I was a patient in several consultations. It's kind of mind blowing. You've seen how far that can go. And at the same time, I have some friends that are seeing patients using platforms like Zoom or Google, and they miss something in the consultation. It's not the same thing. But I'd like to point one thing, that at the same time, you are entering people's homes, like you're seeing their kids and you're connecting with them more frequently. Everybody's sitting in front of a computer. They're not traveling around the world. So I'm talking with a lot of companies, managers. I'm talking with investigators, and I'm developing a kind of relationship that it's not like the same relationship I could develop if I were there sitting, looking into their eyes. But at the same time, I'm knowing that their kids, they are hearing my kids screaming around, and we are creating a connection that's totally different. And we had never been exposed to that before, right? We were like just wearing nice clothes, going to like offices and having like a really formal relationship, and now it's completely disrupted. And I see a potential for that to be a good point for us to learn. I don't know how this is going to be like in some years, and the things that we will learn, the experiences that we will collect from that, but I'm definitely seeing that changing, and this has been really like from like an innovator perspective, this is exciting.
Thanks, Felipe. Scott, there are a lot of comments here. Carol made one that the companies had to really change and adapt, but in reality, we're talking about people here, right? So because we have a lot of students and they're just trying to learn a lot of things and get ready for the market, what skills do you think these kids, these students need to have for this change that we're having in so fast?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Enio, and I get asked this question quite often, and I have there's one metric I believe that I use to judge, or not judge, but to have students embrace what's most critical for them in terms of being successful, especially in an innovation type environment. And that is to be, well, actually there's two. One is to be curious and to be courageous. Curiosity is by far and away one of the best characteristics that you can have to try and propel yourself into the innovation society. What I mean by curious is always ask, well, why not? Or how come? Or what if? It's always asking those questions from a pure sense of inquisitiveness, not just sort of doing it just for the sake of doing it. What you'll do is you'll find that what you think you're going to go down one path by asking those questions, and the responses that you get are going to be very interesting, and they'll take you down several other paths where you had no idea where you were going to go. So that's one, is to be curious. The other is to be courageous. When I say be courageous, what I mean by that is put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to sit back. It's to Felipe's point. It's actually easier now in the pandemic because it's so easy to connect this way. But even before all this, it was go meet somebody you didn't think that would take your call or take your meeting. Walk into a conversation being curious, but also being open-minded about it, because you're going to get some benefit coming out of that you had no idea what you were going to do before. So if you're young and inexperienced, you don't think you have a lot to offer, that is absolutely fundamentally untrue. You have a tremendous amount to offer. The most thing you have to offer is your ability to learn, and then ultimately to give back at some point in the future, maybe right away, but certainly at some point in the future. So those are my two characteristics: curiosity and courageousness.
Thanks, Scott. Rob, a little bit about the university in U.S. I think university in U.S., and especially in the Boston area, there are so many universities. We're talking about Harvard, MIT, and they were always the model, right? But on the other hand, you get Uninter, you take Harvard. Harvard has 20,000 students. You get Uninter, 250,000 students. The price of Harvard, we're talking about almost $80,000 a year. Uninter doesn't have that price, and because one professor can teach hundreds of students, and that's much more efficient. They send lab equipment to the house of the students, and they can do lab work from home. I see that with COVID and all this digital transformation, a lot of these universities are going to basically disappear, because if we do more online, one professor can teach much more kids, and some schools that are small are going to not going to survive. So, do you think they are seeing that, they are getting ready for that? Do you see any change in terms of the education? I see a big impact of also international students. I don't know if you have this information, Rob, but because of the political situation and also the COVID, a lot of international students are not going to be able to study in US. Can you give us a little bit your view of the future for this small college?
Sure. There will absolutely, and it's already happening, be a lot more consolidation within the US of the smaller institutions, either joining forces or some of the larger marquee types of institutions, like you mentioned, whether it's an Ivy League school like a Harvard, Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale, actually acquiring some of the smaller institutions and combining their coursework. So as I mentioned before, I don't think the traditional brick and mortar on-campus experience will go away, but I do think online will continue to grow. And somebody had asked a question, what percentage of students in the U.S. study online currently? It was a great question. In the graduate degree programs, it's currently running at about 30%. This is pre-COVID. That is growing tremendously fast. I anticipate maybe in 2 to 3 years, that number could be 50 or 60%. In the undergraduate space, traditional 4-year undergraduate degrees, pre-COVID, it's been steady at about 15% total online. That will easily double, probably in the next 2 years. For instance, this year, almost every undergraduate program in the U.S. has either gone completely virtual or some hybrid model. So, as Scott was mentioning earlier, in terms of, why is online good? And I like to use the term better mousetrap. Educators have learned to leverage technology to deliver a similar, maybe even a better model online using technology and reinventing themselves compared to 40, 50, 60 years ago. So I see a big trend to online. Somebody else had also asked an important question, though, and this is internet access. As we all know, broadband internet access is not readily available. Here in the US, it's been an issue during COVID, with up to 60% of households not having quality broadband internet. Somebody mentioned in Brazil, it's as much as 70%. So one of the solutions to that, which is rather interesting, I'll use the term learning, the letter M, mobile learning, does allow folks to actually study, have access to information, content, communications, etc., with a cell connection, and not necessarily a full, powerful broadband connection, but native mobile apps oftentimes allow data to be native and stored on your device, and the connection not to be the same as a broadband connection. So we see learning or mobile learning really another emerging, growing market. And I do know actually in Africa, in the rural areas, there are undergraduate degrees currently being offered through a mobile app environment. So I guess to answer your question, Enio, online absolutely will be at least 50, maybe 60% of the total, post-secondary education delivery mechanism, I believe, in the future. And the ability to contain cost is huge. I think that's the other, higher ed has become out of reach for a vast majority of folks, traditional higher education, with, tuitions and room and board and so forth at private universities here in the U.S., $50,000 to $75,000 per year. That's just not sustainable and growing. So typically online programs here in the U.S. Are generally in the 30 to 40% discount of tuition for typical on-campus programs.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rob. Felipe, you had a great experience in terms of innovation in Brazil, and you're having a great opportunity also in the US in terms of innovation. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in Brazil compared to US? I know that it's completely different, but it would be great to have you sharing your experience with all the students here.
Yeah, so I think the main experience, the main difference between the two environments is that there's a totally different approach about infrastructure. I see here in the US, at least in the healthcare sector, you see a lot of like incumbent companies that play like a dominant role, and you see like Epic, those huge EHR systems. You see like Nuance for voice recognition. You see like those large companies being like all hostels. They have their systems and they offer a lot of services. So if you think about a person wanting to start a business, you have to compete with those large players here, and they do a lot of stuff. They have really like systems that can play in all points of the process. But when you go to Brazil, you see a much more fragmented digital space in healthcare. So you see a lot of smaller players. You don't see hospitals that are so digitized as they are in the US. So you see a lot of space for new entrants to offer services, for people to offer integration services, or to offer a specific service in the process that can help transferring data and being more efficient. Like I used to say that Brazil has a lot of inefficiencies that are huge opportunities for you to start a business and to solve them. So I at the same time, you do not have the same interconnectivity that's key for healthcare. If you don't think about a patient-centered, interconnected approach, it's really hard for you to really offer value in the end for the patient. So you don't have that in Brazil. Here in the US, you have some governmental measures and some measures from the industry to try to ease interconnectivity. But in Brazil, it's harder to see that. At the same time, companies that are playing and being that broker that connect the dots, they can play a larger role in the healthcare system. So I think we're talking about two different animals with positive points and negative points. But I see Brazil as a huge opportunity for startups to solve the issues we see there.
Thanks, Felipe. Scott, I will ask you two questions. One is if you can cover what Herbert just asked in terms of the human factor when we're talking about innovation. That's one. The second one is because since you deal with a lot of startups, when COVID hit, of course, a lot of sad things happened in terms of so many families suffering from loss of people that they really love. But for entrepreneurs, was sad because many are out of the business. In US, 1 in 4 companies closed doors. But that is also, like Felipe said, when he compared US with Brazil, the amount of new opportunities that entrepreneurs have now that we never thought that we would have, it's just unbelievable, right? Yeah. I know that there are two different questions. They're not so related, but if you can address that
together,
the students here would be great.
Yeah, let me answer the second one first in terms of what happens. Why is the pandemic an opportunity for entrepreneurs? I believe the answer is absolutely yes, for sure. And I've seen that. I haven't studied it quantitatively, but I'm seeing it in the rise of, for instance, there's actually a growing growth rate in new restaurants opening compared to other years. Now, there's a lot that's closing, but there's a lot that's opening as well. More opening now than in other years. Part of the reason why I think that is because entrepreneurs are looking for two main, and this goes a little bit to Felipe's point. They naturally look for two main things for thinking of innovation, starting up a business. One is, where is there friction? Friction being that there's something going on now that I just don't like. It's painful, it's inefficient, it's not giving me the outcome I desire. So where's that friction that occurs? And I use Uber as an example for that. So, the taxi experience was awful prior to Uber. So you get a much better experience. But really the key for Uber is not only the customer experience. It was a way for them to have labor on demand. If you had a taxi system, you had to deploy or employ taxi drivers, and you're paying them whether they were being used or not. And they didn't have a choice in whether they were being used or when they could opt to drive. So you then had a self-selective component to Uber, and it made the labor cost be so much more efficient. So there was friction there that these guys understood, and they capitalized on that. And then there's similar with gaps. Where's there a gap in the system? So I believe that entrepreneurs now, through the pandemic, that the existence of friction and gaps is more exposed now than ever before. It's true that my experience in emerging companies such as Brazil, pre-pandemic, that was true compared to the US. Everywhere now, it's more exposed than ever before. So I think entrepreneurs are are at a key inflection point of being able to capture more activity, more success in the market. To your first question about the human interaction, the fallacy or the problem that I see in disruption and innovation is where we rely on technology too much, so much because it's easy. There has to be, and there always will be, some human intervention to make the decisions about what all this means. I am not a believer that the world will be run by robots, because robots are going to be have to be programmed and recipient to needs of humans. There will be a human intervention all the way through. There's a slide that I have that shows at some point, the rise of MarTech and the rise of AI in MarTech, artificial intelligence, automation. And so marketing is going to be overwhelmed by MarTech, overwhelmed by automation. So when you look at those slides, you think that the human element is going to decrease. It's actually going to increase, but it's going to be at solving for a different problem and at a different level of complex thinking. So in some respects, the more we use robots for, and computers for automation, the more need there is for humans, but at a different level. And therefore, the challenge will be, how do we bring society up to be able to serve that level of complex thinking that's going to be.
Thanks, Scott. Bob, next question for you. You mentioned that a lot of schools or colleges are going online, and Ana Cristina just made a very interesting question here. The competition then becomes global, right? It's everybody's going to be competing for the students. And she mentioned University of Australia can be offering an online program that will be more interesting than the schools that US are offering. We have an example of Uninter opening almost 10 campuses already in US to offer to US and even Brazilians that are living here. So what do you think about these questions that Ana Cristina made? Will be a global competition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about that, and colleges have been doing this for a long time. I'm sure everybody watching this event has heard of, programs, whether they be overseas or even in the same country, dual degrees from 2 or 3 different universities, study abroad programs and so forth. So what I think, honestly, we'll see, because it's a global economy and a global workforce, we'll see more and more universities partnering and collaborating with international partners and offering more dual degrees or kind of collaborative programs across different borders. And, I think what we're seeing, again, because of technology, what we're sitting here doing today, and folks from all over the world are together, the lines of, the international division lines that we see between countries and states and provinces are beginning to become more and more blurred. And I think that the universities that are smart about their business model will continue to develop relationships with other international programs or out of their region. And I believe higher ed will become a more international program. Thanks,
Rob. Felipe, Joel asked a question. I don't know if you saw that. If you didn't, I can repeat that to you. Yeah, Joel is here. But I'll also ask you the following question. You are an entrepreneur in Brazil. Now you work for a company here. I'm sure that you're scratching yourself and say, I want to start my new business. If you had to pick Brazil or US to start your next business, which country would you pick and for what reason?
Yeah, I did this before and I would do this again. I saw a problem in Brazil that was being solved by something that we hadn't here. And in the US, we had the solution for this problem. So I believe that and we call this copycatting, right? We pick an idea and we just transfer geographically to another setting. So I think this still seems smart to me, because you go over giant shoulders and you walk through something that was already done. It's obvious that you need some adaptation, but I believe that this could be a really good idea. So it like for the students that are hearing this session, I believe that thinking about problems that are being solved, that you have already learned how to solve in a different place or in a different industry, that's a really good example. Sometimes we tend to be really industry focused, but at the same time we see industries that are lagging behind digital transformation or any other specific aspect, and you can just transfer the concepts through industries or work in industry edges between industry, like finance, healthcare. You see a lot of companies that are playing around insurance, health insurance, that are starting to appear in Brazil, that are bringing new capacities. And I believe that there's no difference in capacity. I think people trained, people educated, they can. I worked and studied here with people from all over the world. The human being is the same. We have more 99.99% of the same DNA. There's no like large difference. I think it's more like the software you apply to the hardware, right? So the mindset, Scott put it like in a clear way. The mindset, the environment, how you approach problems, if you think that's just an inefficiency and you complain about that for your whole life, that's a point. If you want to like work hard to solve that and make money and be successful and help people along the way, this is another way to deal with the issue. I think this is the difference, right? And we see like a lot of young people, experienced people in Brazil trying to make a difference and create new things. So I will explore nowadays with this digital world. I think this is another point that Rob mentioned, like you can learn from here, you can learn what people are doing here, you can learn cutting edge technologies and procedures and bring that to Brazil. I think that's an exercise that's always helpful for everybody.
Thanks, Felipe. So we have probably another 4 or 5 minutes here. So I want to ask the same question to all of you. We spent the last year was a tough year for everybody, and U.S. was hit hard, and Brazil same thing. But there, like we said, we are all entrepreneurs here, and we see the glass half full, right? So what's the message that you guys would like to give to the Uninter students here and other people that are watching us in terms of the future and the opportunities that we have? Scott, sorry that you're the first one, but you're an entrepreneur. You went through COVID, right? It was tough in the beginning. Companies still open. There are a lot of new clients. Probably what Steve Blank, one great guy in entrepreneurship, said, if your business model is the same from the one that you had in March, there is something wrong with your company. Can you tell some good news about the future? That we need good news these days.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is good news. I mean, for all the tragedy associated with, I won't go the entrepreneurship route, although I'll touch on it. For all the tragedy that the world has endured, and it has been horrific, there's no doubt about it. What I think about is how much people have come together. And I'm speaking about this from somebody in the U.S., which is a very divided country right now. But as humans, we have come together in far more expansive and supportive ways than ever before. There's no way that you would have ever had expected to see the city of New York. New Yorkers tend to be tough, applauding the first line workers at 7:00 every night by banging pots and pans every night. And I think the same thing happened in Rio and Sao Paulo too, and frankly, all around the world. So that level of outpouring of support is just incredible. And we've kind of diminished away from that a little bit, but I think it's going to come back. And it's what it has done is created a different plateau for which we're operating on. So I think that from a humanistic perspective, I have far more hope now than I did pre-pandemic, even though we've gone through this tragedy. I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think Felipe said it well, which is you're always faced with a challenge. Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during the pandemic, it's always a challenge. The pandemic is just another challenge. It's different. It's got different parameters to it, but you find a way to fight through it. And even if your business fails, it doesn't mean that you failed. In fact, what's interesting in the U.S., more so than any place around the world, and I've talked to entrepreneurs and been involved with entrepreneurship around the world, is that if you fail in the U.S., it's actually a badge of honor. You become more valuable to the next investor because you have learned so much from the failure as opposed to always creating success, because you don't learn from success so much as you do from failure. So I think this is a prime time for entrepreneurship to go out and be curious and courageous and embrace that human supportive spirit that's all around the world.
Thanks, Scott. Rob?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on what Scott said, because I was thinking the same thing. COVID's absolutely made the world smaller, and I think removed a lot of barriers and allowed people to think more collectively, which I think is huge when you think about in terms of education overall. I'm actually working with an organization right now that has a platform that connects school-age children and teachers in one country with school-age children and teachers in another. So the removal of barriers, the necessity for people to band together, I think has been huge. And what I believe that's created is more openness in terms of a mindset. Just people to be more open about the possibilities of, working together, collaborating together, economic improvement, and as well, and not to kind of steal what Scott said, but the world is always changing. There's always change every single moment, every day, whether it's good or bad. And sometimes out of, terrible, bad experiences come some wonderful things. And even sometimes out of good experiences don't come some great things. So as long as we embrace change, that's where innovation really comes into play. And a lot of it, Felipe probably sees this in the medical industry or healthcare, and we see it in higher ed, very slow in terms of adoption and mind shift. And, as Scott used the word change management, that's very, very slow. I think what COVID has done has accelerated people's internal feelings about let's move things along, right? There's no better time than today to actually take an initiative and move it forward.
Thanks, Rob. Felipe?
Yeah, I think from a healthcare perspective, we could never be more on the spotlight. I think everybody's a little bit a physician nowadays that learned, studied a lot about it, and I think that put a lot of spotlight on how hard is to practice healthcare, how exposed people are, how hard it is to make science, how hard it is to develop things, and I think nowadays from a healthcare personal perspective, I believe that nowadays people understand more about what we do and the importance of the person, of that single person that's on the other side, right? That's exposing themselves, the frontline workers, like they were heroes during that time. It's amazing how the jobs changed, right? We used to think that the CEO is the most important person. Now you crave to have somebody to help delivering something to your door, and the Amazon drivers are the heroes of this pandemic. So it's amazing how the people perspective completely changed, and we see jobs, people that were just marginalized from the core of our society being brought back. And I think this human perspective is going to last. We learned a lot from this experience, and I think this changed us and will keep changing for the future.
Okay, Scott, Rob, Felipe, thanks for sharing your thoughts tonight. I know that's Friday night, and everybody should be ready for a beer right now. And go back to your family. Thanks very much. I will apologize, and I will switch to Portuguese, because I want to to thank everybody over there. Pessoal, obrigado por esses 4 dias de audiência. Excelente. Eu dou parabéns a vocês também por terem escolhido a Uninter. Já prova que vocês já são mais familiarizados com tecnologia do que a maioria das pessoas. Escolheram uma faculdade que já é online. Então, parabéns pela escolha de vocês. Espero que esses 4 dias tenham sido enriquecedores para vocês. A ideia hoje era trazer um pouco da perspectiva dos Estados Unidos para vocês e espero que a gente tenha cumprido isso. Depois eu posso também dividir o contato desse pessoal. Eles querem estar em contato com vocês, como vocês podem estar em contato com eles também. Qualquer pergunta, qualquer ajuda, nós estamos à disposição aqui. Obrigado a todos, boa noite para vocês.